The eclipse spire did not float. It hung in the void like a dagger suspended by an invisible thread, piercing the velvet darkness of the nocturne dominion. It was a technological monstrosity, a vertical city of steel and glass, stretching 50 kilometers from base to tip, spinning slowly to generate gravity that always felt slightly too heavy for human bones. For the Vargan, the vampire-wolf hybrids who ruled this sector of the galaxy, the gravity was a comfort, a reminder of their high-mass homeworld. For humanity, the valued allies of the Eclipse Alliance, it was a constant, subtle pressure on the chest, a reminder that they were guests in a house built by predators. Down in the bowels of Sector 9, where the air scrubbers hummed with the rhythmic wheeze of an old man's lungs, Adrian Cole wiped grease from his hands with a rag that was filthier than the machinery he was touching. "It is not the heating element," Adrian said, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the din of the market district. "The pressure regulator is oscillating at 300 hertz. It is confusing the sensors." Jarek, a three-armed merchant from the Orion Belt, looked at his prized caffeine synthesizer with skepticism. "Oscillating. It just makes the coffee taste like battery acid coal. Can you fix it or not? I am losing 50 credits an hour here." "I already fixed it," Adrian replied, tossing the rag onto his toolbox. He tapped the side of the machine with a singular, precise strike of his knuckle. The machine gave a contented whir, and the smell of rich, dark roast began to permeate the stale air of the stall. "That will be 40 credits, cash. No digital trails." Jarek grumbled two of his hands, digging into his pockets while the third poured a test cup. "You are expensive for a grease monkey coal. You know that quality costs," Adrian said, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was always scanning. It was a habit from a life he had buried under 15 years of oil stains and mediocrity. He saw them before Jarek even looked up. A patrol of 3 Vargan enforcers moved through the crowd. They were tall, nearly 2 meters each, clad in the sleek obsidian armor of the Dominion. They did not push people out of the way. The crowd parted for them like water around a shark. The Vargan moved with a fluid, predatory grace, their movements silent, despite the heavy plating. Adrian kept his head down, focusing on packing his tools. He felt the prickle on the back of his neck, the primal reaction of prey, sensing a predator. But he did not run. He did not flinch. He just became bored. He became part of the background, just another human mechanic in a station of millions. "Dad." The voice was a whisper in his earpiece, sharp and clear. "I told you not to use that frequency unless it is an emergency, Mira," Adrian muttered, keeping his lips barely moving. "It is not an emergency. It is a mathematical impossibility." The girl's voice came back, sounding indignant. She was 9 years old, going on 30. "The AI tutor Dr. Eris insists that the variable in this equation is constant. But if I factor in the energy decay of a standard slip-space drive, the variable has to fluctuate by 0.04%. The doctor is wrong." Adrian sighed a small smile, tugging at the corner of his mouth beneath his beard. "The AI is using standard imperial physics, Mira. You are using the theoretical physics I showed you last week. Do not correct the machine. It draws attention. Just write down the answer it wants." "But it is wrong," she insisted. "Being right and being safe are two different things," Adrian reminded her, his tone hardening slightly. "Remember the rules." There was a pause on the line. "I know. Head down. Grades average. No fighting. I am bored. I am invisible." "Good girl. I will be home in 20 minutes. I picked up those protein bars you hate." "You are the worst." "I will try." Adrian cut the connection and took the credits Jarek slapped into his hand. As he turned to leave, he felt a sudden shift in the air pressure of the station. It was subtle, something a normal human would miss, but Adrian felt it in his teeth. The low-frequency thrum of the station's stabilizers changed pitch. Docking clamps, massive ones. He looked up toward the upper levels of the spire through the transparent aluminum ceiling that offered a view of the starfield. A shadow was blotting out the stars. It was not a freighter, and it was certainly not a diplomatic shuttle. It was a dreadnought. The hull was jagged and black, absorbing the light of the local nebula. Red running lights pulsed like the heartbeat of a dying star. The sheer mass of it sent a vibration through the deck plates that rattled the teeth of everyone in the market. "Void preserve us," Jarek whispered, all three hands clutching his chest. "That is a Royal heavy cruiser." Adrian stood very still. The Vargan Royal fleet did not come to eclipse Spire unannounced. Not unless something catastrophic was about to happen. "Go home, Jarek," Adrian said, his voice losing the casual drawl of the mechanic and sharpening into something colder. "Close the stall, now." Before the merchant could argue, Adrian was moving. He did not run. Running attracted attention, but he walked with a swift, ground-eating stride that wove through the confusion of the panic-stricken crowd. He needed to get to a vantage point. He needed to know why the Wolves had brought a warship to a diplomatic station. High above the market, in the intricate lattice of maintenance walkways that ran alongside the main power conduits, Adrian knelt in the shadows. He pulled a compact datapad from his belt and synced it to the hardline terminal on the wall. "Mira," he said, activating the comms. "Are you home?" "Yes," she replied, her voice tight. "Dad, the news feeds are blacked out. The local net is swamped. Everyone is freaking out." "I know. Stay inside. Lock the door. Engage the privacy shielding." "I am already on it. But Dad, I can see the ship. It is huge. I am hacking the external sensors near the Royal docking bay." "Mira, no," Adrian hissed. "If they trace you, they won't. I am bouncing the signal through 3 garbage scows and a vending machine in Sector 4. Look at your screen. I am patching you in." Adrian wanted to scold her, to tell her to sever the connection, but his tactical curiosity overrode his paternal fear. His datapad flickered, and a grainy image resolved itself. It was a security feed from the high-security docks at the very apex of the spire. The airlock of the dreadnought hissed open, venting steam into the hangar bay. A ramp descended looking like a tongue extending from the mouth of a beast. 2 columns of Vargan Royal Guards marched out. They were elite soldiers, the Crimson Fangs wearing armor that looked like flayed muscle over steel. And then she stepped out. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. His breath hitched in his throat, a physical reaction to a ghost he had not expected to see in the flesh. Empress Celine Nightclaw. She was taller than a human man, her presence dominating the massive hangar. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, pale and luminous, contrasting sharply with the long, flowing coat of midnight blue velvet that trailed behind her. Her hair was silver, cascading down her back, like a waterfall of liquid mercury. But it was her eyes that froze Adrian's heart, gold predatory, with vertical pupils that scanned the hangar, with an intelligence that was both ancient and terrifying. She did not look like a diplomat. She looked like a weapon sheathed in silk. "That is the Empress," Mira whispered in his ear, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "Why is she here? The summit wasn't supposed to be for another 2 months." "Something has changed," Adrian murmured. He watched as Celine stopped at the base of the ramp. A human delegation was hurrying to meet her, led by the station governor, a sweating man named Thorne, who looked like he might faint. Celine ignored him. She stopped, her head tilting slightly to the side. Her nostrils flared. Adrian went rigid. He was 5 kilometers away, buried in the infrastructure of the station, hidden behind layers of plasteel and energy fields. There was no way she could smell him. It was impossible. And yet, on the small screen, the Empress turned. She did not look at the governor. She did not look at the Royal Guards. She looked up. She looked directly into the security camera Mira had hacked. For a second, the distance evaporated. Adrian felt those golden eyes bore into him, stripping away the grease, the mechanic's jumpsuit, the 15 years of hiding. He felt a phantom sensation, a cold pressure against his mind like a finger, tracing the path of an old scar. I know you are there. The thought was not his own. It was a cold intrusion, sharp and sudden. On the screen, Celine's lips curled into a smile that was not a smile at all. It was a baring of teeth. Then the feed is cut to static. "Dad!" Mira's voice was high with panic. "Dad, the camera just burned out. It was overloaded. Did you see that she looked right at us?" Adrian yanked the cable from the terminal, severing the connection physically. His hands were shaking. He clenched them into fists until the knuckles turned white. He forced himself to breathe. In, out. 4 seconds count. "She didn't see us, Mira," he lied, his voice steadying through sheer force of will. "It was just a coincidence. She was looking at the security cluster." "She looked right at the lens," Mira argued. It felt heavy, like gravity. "Just a coincidence," Adrian repeated, standing up. He grabbed his toolbox. "I am coming home. Do not open the door for anyone. Not even if they say they are maintenance. I know the drill, Dad, but I am coming home." He moved toward the ladder, intending to descend into the labyrinth of the lower levels and disappear. But before he could take a step, his personal comms unit, the official one issued by the station, buzzed against his chest. It was a priority override. Red light flashed on the device. "Incoming call station security chief Rhea Park," Adrian cursed silently. He could not ignore a chief security summons. Not if he wanted to keep his cover. He took a deep breath, rubbed more grease onto his face to hide the pale shock of his skin, and answered. "Cole here," he said, sounding tired and annoyed. "I am off shift, Chief. Whatever broke it can wait until morning." "Cut the crap, Adrian." Rhea Park's voice was sharp, cutting through the static. "I know you are near the dorsal conduits. I tracked your ID tag. That is an invasion of privacy, Chief. I was checking a flux capacitor." "I do not care if you were knitting a sweater," Rhea snapped. "Get up to Sector 1, Security Command, now." "Sector 1?" Adrian feigned a laugh. "That is the VIP zone. My clearance does not even get me into the elevator." "It does now," Rhea said. "I just updated it. Get up here, Cole. The grid is acting up around the Royal Suite, and you are the only one on this station who understands the ancient wiring of the Eclipse Core well enough to fix it without blowing us all into the vacuum." "I am a low-level maintenance tech, Rhea. Get a senior engineer." "The senior engineers are idiots who think the manual is a holy text," Rhea growled. "I need someone who can think. I need you. 10 minutes, Cole, or I send a squad to drag you." The line went dead. Adrian stared at the device. This was it. The nightmare scenario. The Empress was here, and now he was being ordered into the lion's den. "Dad," Mira's voice was small in his ear. She had heard everything. "Change of plan," Adrian said, his voice grim. "I have to go to work. Keep the shields up. Do not hack anything else. Do not even look at a screen." "Is it because of her?" Mira asked. "Is it because the Empress is here?" "It is just a power surge, honey," Adrian said, stepping onto the transit lift. "Just a job. I will be back before you fall asleep." He watched the lower levels recede as the lift shot upward, rising toward the gilded cage of the upper sectors. He checked the reflection in the polished metal of the lift doors. He saw a tired, middle-aged man with graying temples and a stained jumpsuit. But inside, the war architect was waking up, and he was terrified. The office of Security Chief Rhea Park was a study in controlled chaos. Holographic displays of the station floated in the air, showing traffic patterns, energy consumption, and security checkpoints. The room smelled of stale coffee and high-voltage electronics. Rhea Park stood by the window, looking out at the docked dreadnought. She was a woman carved from granite, short and muscular, with scars on her neck that suggested she had survived run-ins with things much nastier than disgruntled smugglers. When the doors hissed open, Adrian walked in, slouching his shoulders to diminish his height, clutching his toolbox like a shield. "You took 12 minutes," Rhea said without turning around. Traffic was bad. A lot of people are running away from the big scary ship, Adrian drawled, dropping into a chair uninvited. So, what is the emergency? Did the Empress plug in a hairdryer and trip a breaker? Rhea turned her dark eyes narrowing. She did not smile. This is not funny, Cole. Do you know who that is down there? The vampire wolf Empress Selene Nightclaw, Adrian recited. Ruler of the Nocturne Dominion Scourge of the Seven Systems, and apparently the reason I am missing dinner with my daughter. She is here for the Blood Moon Summit, Rhea said, tapping a console. A map of the station's upper levels appeared. But she arrived 3 days early. No warning, no diplomatic protocol, just dropped out of slip space and docked. Maybe she wanted to beat the rush, Adrian suggested. She demanded the Obsidian Suite. Rhea continued ignoring him. The problem is the Obsidian Suite sits directly on top of the primary power junction for the station's gravitational stabilizers. About an hour ago, right before she docked, we started seeing micro-fluctuations in that junction. So it is old tech. It fluctuates. It fluctuates in a pattern, Rhea said. She enlarged the schematic. Look at the wave signature. Adrian leaned forward, intending to glance dismissively, but his eyes locked onto the data stream. The jagged lines of the energy output were not random. They were rhythmic, a pulse, a code, or a heartbeat. That is not a malfunction, Adrian said softly, dropping the facade for a split second. That is an external harmonic resonance. Someone is feeding a signal back into the grid. Rhea looked at him sharply. Exactly. My senior engineers said it was a sensor glitch. But you saw it in 2 seconds. Adrian leaned back, crossing his arms. I have seen similar things in old hyperdrives. It happens when the shielding wears thin. Bullshit, Rhea said. She walked around the desk and leaned against it, crossing her ankles. You are too good for this, Cole. I have watched you work. You fix systems that have been broken for 50 years with spare parts and spit. You move like a soldier. You scan rooms like a bodyguard. I grew up in a mining colony, Adrian lied smoothly. It was his standard cover. You learn to fix things fast or you die. You learn to watch your back or you get mugged. It is not mysterious, Chief. It is poverty. It is... Rhea studied him for a long moment. I did a background check on you when I hired you 3 years ago. Adrian Cole, born on Titan Colony. I worked freelance transport, widower. Daughter Mira, born with a genetic muscular atrophy disorder requiring low-stress environments. You memorized my file. I am flattered. The file is perfect, Rhea said quietly. Too perfect. It has all the right stamps, all the right gaps. It is the kind of file someone pays a lot of money to create. Adrian's heart hammered against his ribs, but his face remained a mask of bored indifference. Are you firing me, Rhea, because I can go home? I am not firing you, Rhea said, standing up. I am promoting you, temporarily. I need you to go into the subgrid beneath the Obsidian Suite and find the source of that resonance. I do not trust the Vargan technicians, and I do not trust my own staff, not to wet themselves if a royal guard looks at them. No, Adrian said immediately. Absolutely not. I do not go near the Vargan. That is my rule. Your rule, Rhea raised an eyebrow. Since when do maintenance techs have rules about diplomatic assignments? Since I value my neck, Adrian said, standing up. I have a kid, Rhea. I am not going to crawl around in the ceiling of the Empress's bedroom while her guards are itching for an excuse to drain someone dry. Get someone else. There is nobody else, Rhea snapped, slamming her hand on the desk. If that grid fails while she is in there, the gravity in the suit collapses. The Empress gets crushed. If the Empress gets crushed on a human station, the alliance ends. The war starts again. Do you want that? Do you want Mira to grow up in a war like we did? The mention of the war hit Adrian like a physical blow. He froze. The war, the Sol front, the burning skies of Mars, the smell of ozone and burning flesh. He remembered the sound of the orbital bombardment, the way the ground turned to liquid glass. Adrian's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. I will check the schematics. From the auxiliary control room. I am not going into the suite. Rhea exhaled the tension in her shoulders, dropping slightly. Fine. Auxiliary control. But if you find something, you fix it. I do not care what it is. Fine. Adrian grabbed his toolbox. But I want triple overtime, and a security exemption for Mira's medical supplies. Done, Rhea said. As Adrian reached the door, she spoke again, her voice softer. Cole. He paused, hand on the frame. Yeah. Be careful. The Empress rumors say she is on edge. They say the Blood Council is pushing for a purge of the half-breeds. Tensions are high. Adrian's grip on the toolbox tightened until the metal groaned. I know, he whispered. I know exactly what they are. The shift passed in a blur of tension. Adrian spent 6 hours in a cramped access tube, 3 levels below the royal suite, rerouting power flows and isolating the harmonic interference. It was sabotage, subtle, sophisticated, and buried deep in the code. Someone wanted the grid to fail. He patched it, but he did not remove the source code. He copied it. He needed to analyze it later. If someone was trying to assassinate the Empress, he needed to know who and why, and how far the blast radius would be. When he finally returned to Sector 9, the station's artificial night cycle had begun. The lights were dimmed to a dull amber. He unlocked the door to his quarters with a biometric key and a sequence of mechanical latches he had installed himself. Mira. In here, came the voice from the small main room. The apartment was small, cluttered with scavenged tech. Servos, drone parts, and half-built processors covered every surface. In the center of the room, Mira sat on the floor, surrounded by holographic projections of history texts. She looked up. Her eyes were large and dark, hiding the truth of her biology. She wore the contact lenses he made her wear, masking the slight vertical slit of her pupils. She was small for her age, fragile-looking, but Adrian knew she could hear a pin drop 3 rooms away. You are late, she said. Work was complicated, Adrian said, hanging his heavy utility belt on the hook. He felt the exhaustion seeping into his bones. Not physical exhaustion that he could handle. It was the weight of the memories the Empress's arrival had dredged up. I made soup, Mira said, pointing to a heating unit. It is a synthetic chicken flavor, again. My favorite, Adrian forced a smile. He sat down on the worn sofa, groaning as his back popped. Mira deactivated the holograms and scooted over to him. She leaned her head against his knee. He rested his hand on her hair instinctively, checking her temperature, her pulse. Dad. Why do you hate them so much? Adrian's hand stilled. Who? The Vargan, the Empress. Mira looked up at him. I saw your face on the feed today. You looked like you wanted to kill her. And when Rhea called, you were shaking. I was not shaking, Adrian said defensively. You were. Your heart rate spiked to 120. Adrian sighed. He could never hide from her. She was too sharp, too observant. A mix of his analytical mind and her instincts. It is history, Mira. Just history. It is not just history if it makes you shake, she insisted. The history books say Empress Celine ended the war. They say she signed the Treaty of Saul. They say she is the reason we have peace. Peace, Adrian scoffed, the bitterness spilling out before he could stop it. You call this peace? We live in a tin can, paying blood taxes to monsters who see us as cattle? We hide who you are every single day because if they knew... He stopped. He had almost gone too far. If they knew I was a half-breed, they would kill me, Mira finished for him, her voice matter-of-fact. I know the blood purity edict, Dad. I can read. They would not just kill you, Adrian whispered, staring at the wall, but seeing a burning battlefield. They would take you apart to see how you work. He looked down at her, his eyes burning with a sudden fierce intensity. You asked why I hate her. Why I hate Celine, Mira nodded. Adrian leaned back, closing his eyes. The image of the Empress in the hangar bay burned behind his eyelids. The gold eyes. The beautiful, terrible face. A long time ago, Adrian began, his voice rough, like grinding stones. Before you were born. I was not a mechanic, I was a soldier. I fought on the front lines. I know, Mira said softly. You have scars. There was a woman. Adrian said the words tasting like ash. She was the most brilliant, kindest person I ever knew. She wasn't a soldier. She was a doctor. She wanted to help people. We were going to have a family, a baby. Mira listened breathless. He rarely spoke of her mother. The war was ending, Adrian continued. There was a ceasefire. But Celine wanted to send a message. To make sure humanity stayed broken. She ordered an orbital strike on a medical colony. A neutral zone. Adrian opened his eyes. They were dry, but full of ancient pain. I was there. I dug through the rubble for 3 days. I found nothing. Just dust. He looked at Mira. She took them from me. She took my wife. She took my unborn child. She took my life and left me with nothing but a toolbox and a name that belongs to a dead man. He did not tell her the whole truth. He could not tell her that he had found a crying infant in the wreckage years later, a miracle, a genetic anomaly, found in a hidden lab, not a colony. He could not tell her that the medical colony was actually a black site research facility. He reached out and cupped Mira's face. She leaned into his rough palm. That is why I hate her, Mira, because she is a monster who wears the face of a queen. I am sorry, Dad, Mira whispered. Do not be, Adrian said. He pulled her into a hug, squeezing her tight, burying his face in her hair. He smelled the metallic scent of the station and the faint, sweet scent of her, the only good thing left in the universe. I promised myself something that day, Adrian whispered into the silence of the room, his voice barely audible, a vow made to the ghost that haunted him. What? Mira asked. Adrian pulled back, looking her in the eyes with a ferocity that made him look dangerous, terrifyingly competent. I won't let anyone take family from me again. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rotating lights of the eclipse spire. Far above the night's edge, cast a long shadow over the station. Get some sleep, Mira, he said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. As Mira retreated to her small sleeping pod, Adrian stayed by the window. He touched the inside of his wrist where a small, hidden tattoo was inked beneath the skin, the insignia of the Sol Front Command. The Empress was here. The grid was being sabotaged, and his daughter was in the middle of it. Adrian Cole picked up a heavy wrench from the table. He weighed it in his hand. The mechanic was gone. The war architect was back. And this time, he wasn't going to follow the rules of engagement. The hum of the eclipse core was not a sound one heard so much as felt. It was a vibration in the marrow, a constant reminder that millions of lives relied on a contained star, burning within a cage of magnetic fields and reinforced tritanium. For Adrian Cole, standing on the observation gantry of the primary junction, the sound was wrong. It was off-key. The resonance frequency is drifting again, Adrian said, his voice flat. He did not look up from the holographic interface that hovered above the console. His fingers moved across the light keys with a speed that blurred rewriting subroutines that had not been touched in a decade. It is within safety tolerances, insisted a junior technician, a young man from the Martian colonies, who looked like he had never held a real wrench in his life. Safety tolerances for a cargo freighter, perhaps, Adrian countered, deleting a block of redundant code with a savage swipe of his hand. Not for a station hosting the vampire wolf Empress. If the harmonic feedback hits 4%, the gravity stabilizers in the Obsidian suite will invert. Do you know what happens to a biological body when gravity inverts instantly? The technician swallowed hard and shook his head. It turns into soup, Adrian said. And if the Empress turns into soup, the Vargan fleet currently parked outside will turn this station into dust. Do you want to be Dust Kid? No, sir. Then stop quoting the manual and start routing the excess thermal energy into the heat sinks. Now. Rhea Park watched the exchange from the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. She waited until the terrified technician scrambled away before stepping forward. You have a bedside manner that could curdle milk coal, she commented. I am tired, Rhea, Adrian replied, finally looking up. The dark circles under his eyes were pronounced. He had not slept in 24 hours. And this system is a mess. It is not just age. Someone has been messing with the load-bearing algorithms. It is subtle, but it is there, like termites in the woodwork. That is why you are here, Rhea said, lowering her voice. I have formed a task force, joint operations, human security, and Vargan Royal Guard. We are locking down the core for the duration of the Blood Moon Summit. Adrian stiffened. Vargan Guard, I told you I work alone. Not anymore. The Empress insisted on a joint detail. And frankly, I need you to babysit them. Make sure they do not accidentally break something that vents the human quarters into space. Adrian wiped his grease-stained hands on his jumpsuit. Who is leading the Vargan detail? Lord Cade Thorne. The name hit the room like a drop in temperature. Even Adrian, who tried to keep his head buried in the sand of apathy, knew the name. Cade Thorne was the High Executioner of the Blood Council. He was a pure-blood supremacist who made no secret of his disgust for humanity. Thorne is a butcher, Adrian said quietly. Putting him in charge of station security is like putting a fox in charge of the henhouse. It is politics, Adrian. He represents the council. The Empress has to placate them if she wants this new treaty to pass. Rhea stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I need eyes I can trust. Thorne is bringing his own tech specialists. If they plant something, I need you to find it. Adrian looked at the display at the pulsing red heart of the Eclipse core. He wanted to say no. He wanted to take Mira and find a transport ship heading for the rim. But he knew they would never make it past the docking clamps. The station was on lockdown. Fine, Adrian said. But if Thorne looks at me the wrong way, I am hitting him with a wrench. 3 levels up in the secure communication array of the diplomatic sector, Lord Cade Thorne stood before a wall of glass, looking out at the stars. He was a magnificent, terrifying creature. 7 feet tall, with skin the color of polished slate, and hair like white wire. His uniform was immaculate, adorned with the medals of the cleansing wars. The preparations are complete, my lord, a voice rasped from the shadows. It was Director Vance, a human official, with a sweating forehead and eyes that darted nervously around the room. Vance was the representative of trade, a man whose greed was only eclipsed by his cowardice. Are they? Cade turned. His movement was fluid, like oil sliding over glass. The core remains stable. The human engineer this Cole keeps countering our adjustments. Cole is a nuisance, Vance said quickly. A low-level grease monkey. Rhea Park trusts him, but he is nobody. We can remove him. No, Cade said. He walked over to a table where a decanter of dark crimson liquid sat. He poured a glass. It was synthetic blood, the polite beverage of diplomacy, but Cade stared at it with disdain. Removing him draws attention. Let him fix the stabilizers. It does not matter. The device is not in the stabilizers. Cade took a sip, his lip curling. The device is in the audio-visual array. When the Empress begins her speech, when she opens her mouth to declare equality with your mongrel race, the signal will broadcast. The cleansing signal, Vance whispered. You are sure it will only affect the target demographic? It targets the specific neural resonance of hybrid biology, Cade said smoothly. The half-breeds, the abominations. It will trigger a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Instant, violent, public. It will look like a biological failure, a plague inherent to their impure blood. The Empress will be humiliated. The humans will be terrified. And the Council will finally have the excuse to reinstate the Purity Edict. And the credits, Vance asked, rubbing his hands together. My position on the new Council? You will have your seat, human, Cade said, his eyes flashing with a cold, predatory amusement. As long as the signal plays. In the cramped apartment in Sector 9, Mira sat cross-legged on her bunk, her eyes closed, listening. She was not asleep. She was surfing. The headset she wore was a piece of junk Adrian had found in a scrap heap, but Mira had modified it. She had boosted the receiver with a coil of copper wire and a shard of unauthorized crystal she had bartered for. She could pick up encrypted channels if she tuned the frequency just right, sliding between the static of the official networks. Static. Static. A burst of Vargan poetry. Static. Then a voice. Cold. Arrogant. Culling the half-bloods as a cleansing signal, Mira's eyes snapped open. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt too loud in the silence of the room. Targets the specific neural resonance of hybrid biology. She sat up, her hands trembling, as she reached for the recording interface. She needed to save this. She tapped the console, the buffer filling with the encrypted burst. Mira, the door to the apartment hissed open. Mira jumped, ripping the headset off and shoving it under her pillow. Adrian stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his jumpsuit stained with coolant and grease, but his eyes were sharp. He scanned the room instantly, the hastily hidden headset, the guilty posture, the flushed skin. "What were you doing?" Adrian asked, his voice low. "Nothing," Mira said too quickly. "Just homework. Dr. Eris gave me extra calculus." Adrian walked over to the bunk. He did not look angry. He looked scared. He reached under the pillow and pulled out the headset. "We talked about this," Adrian said, holding the device up. "No scanning the secure bands. If the Royal Guard traces the signature back to this room." "Dad, listen to me," Mira said, scrambling to her knees. "I heard something. 2 men. One was human, one was Vargan. They were talking about a signal. About killing half-bloods." Adrian went still. The exhaustion vanished from his face, replaced by a terrifying intensity. He looked at the recording buffer on the console. "Play it," he commanded. Mira keyed the sequence. The voice of Cade Thorne filled the small room, distorted by distance, but unmistakable in its malice. Massive cerebral hemorrhage. Instant. Violent. Public Adrian listened to the entire clip. He did not move. He did not blink. When it finished, he tapped the console, encrypting the file with a military-grade algorithm he had written 20 years ago. "Who else heard this?" Adrian asked. "Nobody. I was on a ghost frequency." Adrian sat down on the edge of the bed. He put his head in his hands for a moment, then looked up at her. "You are sure it was a Vargan and a human?" "Yes." The human sounded scared. The Vargan sounded hungry. Adrian stood up and began to pace the small room. His mind was racing, connecting dots that Rhea Park and her security team had missed. The fluctuations in the core. They were not sabotage intended to destroy the station. They were a carrier wave, a power source for a broadcast. "They are going to use the Summit broadcast system," Adrian muttered to himself. "They are going to turn the public address speakers into a sonic weapon." "Dad?" Mira asked, her voice small. "Am I going to die?" Adrian stopped. He turned to her, and the look on his face broke her heart and terrified her all at once. It was the look of a wolf standing over its cub. "No," Adrian said fiercely. "No. I am going to fix it." "How? You are just a mechanic." "I am not just a mechanic, Mira. I never was." Before he could explain, before he could tell her the truth he had hidden for a decade, a heavy thud shook the door. Then another. "Open up. Royal Guard. By order of Her Imperial Majesty." Mira gasped, backing against the wall. Adrian moved instantly, grabbing a small, innocuous-looking metal rod from his belt, a hydrospanner he had modified into a high-yield stun baton. "Stay behind me," Adrian whispered. He hit the door release. 3 figures stood in the hallway. They were Crimson Fangs, the Empress's personal elite. They wore armor that seemed to absorb the light etched with glowing red runes. But they did not have their weapons drawn. Adrian Cole, the lead guard said. His voice was a growl that vibrated on the floorboards. That is me, Adrian said, his grip on the baton tightening. You are summoned, the guard said. The Empress requests your presence in the Obsidian Suite, immediately. I am off duty, Adrian said, and I have a child. The child will remain here. The perimeter is secure. You will come with us. It was not a request. Adrian looked back at Mira. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw the intelligence. She understood. If he fought them here, he would die, and she would be alone. Lock the door, Mira, Adrian said, his voice steady. Engage the privacy shields. Do not open it for anyone but me. Do not listen to the radio. Dad, I will be back, I promise. He stepped into the hallway. The guards fell into formation around him. As they marched him toward the turbolifts, Adrian realized with a sinking feeling that he was not walking to an execution. He was walking into something far more dangerous. He was walking into the past. The Obsidian Suite was less a room and more a cathedral to Vargan aesthetic. The walls were made of black glass that offered a panoramic view of the nebula outside. The floor was polished onyx. The air was kept colder than the rest of the station, smelling faintly of ozone and crushed pine needles. Adrian stood in the center of the room. The guards had left him there. He waited. He did not fidget. He stood at ease, his feet shoulder-width apart, his hands clasped behind his back. It was a soldier's stance, one he had not used in 15 years. You have aged, Adrian. The voice came from the balcony. Adrian turned slowly. Celine Nightclaw stood in the moonlight. She was not wearing the heavy ceremonial armor she had arrived in. She wore a simple gown of silver silk that clung to her frame, revealing the dangerous, powerful musculature beneath. Her hair was loose, a river of starlight. But her eyes were the same. Golden, ancient, sad. It has been 15 years, Your Majesty, Adrian said. His voice was dry. Time tends to do that to my species. We do not have your luxury of immortality. Celine walked toward him. Her movement was silent. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he could feel the cold radiance of her skin. You hid well, she said. A mechanic, you. The man who designed the kinetic bastion of Mars. The war architect of the Sol Front died on Titan, Adrian said, reciting the lie he had lived by. I am just a guy who fixes coffee machines. Celine laughed, a low, throaty sound that lacked humor. Do not insult my intelligence, Adrian. I recognized your signature in the core repairs today. No one else routes power with that specific redundancy pattern. It is aggressive, paranoid, efficient. It is you. Why did you bring me here, Celine? Adrian dropped the honorifics. The bitterness was rising in his throat like bile. Did you want to see what you broke? Celine flinched. It was a microscopic movement, but Adrian saw it. I did what I had to do, she said softly. The war was consuming both our worlds. The bombardment of the colony forced the human high command to surrender. It saved billions of lives. It killed my wife, Adrian said. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp as knives. It killed my unborn child. You knew they were there. I told you. I told you the coordinates of the safe zone because I trusted you. I had no choice, Celine whispered. Her golden eyes searched his face, looking for a trace of the man she had once loved in secret, amidst the chaos of a galactic war. The Blood Council demanded a show of force. If I had refused, they would have replaced me with Cade Thorne, and Thorne would not have stopped at a colony. He would have burned Earth. So you sacrificed my world to save yours, Adrian said. He stepped closer, his anger overcoming his fear. You talk about choices, Celine. You had 1,000 choices. I just was not on the list. Celine looked away, staring out at the stars. I have regretted that day for 5,000 nights, Adrian. Every time I close my eyes, I see the fire. Good, Adrian said coldly. Keep seeing it. I did not bring you here to beg for forgiveness, Celine said, her voice hardening, regaining the regal steel of the Empress. She turned back to him. I brought you here because I am surrounded by traitors. Adrian crossed his arms. Let me guess. Cade Thorne. Thorne, the council. Half my own guard, Celine admitted. They think I am weak because I seek peace with humanity. They want the summit to fail. They want blood. I know, Adrian said. They are planning something for the broadcast. A signal. Celine's eyes widened. How do you know that? Because I am paranoid, Adrian said. And because I have better ears on this station than you do. They are targeting the half-breed Celine. They want to trigger a biological reaction that looks like a plague. Celine's face went pale. A culling signal. It was a theoretical weapon from the Dark Age. I thought the schematics were destroyed. Cade found them, or someone gave them to him. Celine stepped forward, closing the gap between them. She reached out her hand, hovering near his arm, but not touching him. I need you, Adrian. I cannot trust my tactical team. They report to the council. I need the war architect. I need you to find the transmitter and shut it down before the speech. Why should I help you? Adrian asked. You created this monster of an empire. You deal with it. Because innocent people will die, Celine said. Human children, Vargan children. And because I know you, Adrian Cole. You are angry, and you are hurt, but you are not cruel. You will not let a massacre happen just to spite me. Adrian looked at her. He hated that she was right. He hated that even after everything, the proximity to her made his heart ache with a familiar treacherous rhythm. But more than that, he thought of Mira. Mira alone in that room. Mira, who was a half-breed. He was not doing this for Celine. He was doing this for his daughter. And he was doing this for revenge. If he helped Celine now, he would be on the inside. He could find the evidence to destroy Cade Thorne. He could tear the Blood Council down brick by brick. I will do it, Adrian said. But on my terms. I want full access to the station's mainframe, level 10 clearance, and I want a guarantee of safety for the civilians in Sector 9. You have it, Celine said instantly. And Adrian. He stopped halfway to the door. I am glad you are alive. Adrian did not look back. I am not, he said, and he walked out. While Adrian walked the corridors of power, Lord Cade Thorne sat in the center of his web. The surveillance feed on his desk showed the human engineer leaving the Empress's suite. Cade watched the way Cole moved. He did not walk like a laborer. He walked like a predator, conserving energy. Interesting, Cade mused. The Empress calls a mechanic to her chambers in the middle of the night. Perhaps they are intimate, Vance suggested with a sneer. No, Cade said. There is no lust in that walk. There is a purpose. He tapped a claw against the glass desk. This Cole is a variable. He countered the core fluctuations too quickly, and now he is meeting with Celine. He knows something. Should I send a squad to eliminate him? No. If we kill him now, Rhea Park will lock down the station and the summit will be cancelled. We need the summit to proceed. Cade's eyes narrowed. Every man has a weakness, a lever to pry him open. He began to scroll through the background data Vance had compiled on Adrian Cole. It was a boring file. Service records, tax returns, grocery lists. Then Cade stopped. He pulled up a medical requisition form. Muscular atrophy medication, Cade read. For a daughter, Mira Cole, age 9. He swiped the screen, bringing up the school records for Mira Cole. There was a photo. A small girl with dark hair and serious eyes. Cade zoomed in on the eyes. He studied the pixels. The contact lenses are high quality, Cade murmured. "But the refraction index is wrong for a human." A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Vance," Cade said softly, "prepare a containment team. I want the girl." "The girl, why?" "Because she is not human," Cade said, standing up. "She is a half-breed, hiding in plain sight. If we take her, we control Cole. And if we put her on the stage when the signal triggers, she will be the perfect demonstration of our cause." Adrian returned to the security hub Rhea had set up. He had the access codes. Celine had given him a digital key that unlocked every door and every database on the Eclipse Spire. "You look like you saw a ghost," Rhea said as he walked in. "I did," Adrian muttered. He sat down at the main terminal. "I need to cross-reference the energy signatures with the personnel roster of the Blood Council. I am looking for a bioengineer, someone who specializes in sonic neurology." "On it," Rhea said, typing furiously. While Rhea worked, Adrian opened a secondary window. He inserted the drive Celine had given him. It contained the Blood Council's internal watch list files, intercepted by the Empress's personal spies. He needed to know who else was a target. He needed to know the scale of the threat. The list scrolled by. Hundreds of names. Political dissidents. Sympathizers. Then he saw a subfolder titled Anomalies Priority Targets. Adrian opened it. The list was short, 12 names. They were listed by genetic markers, not names. Subject 1, 50% human, 50% Vargan. Status terminate. Subject 2, 75% human, 25% Vargan. Status terminate. He scrolled down to the bottom. Subject 12, unidentified female. Sector 9, Estor, age 9. Genetic marker. Royal variance detected. Adrian stopped breathing. Royal variance. The photo attached was a grainy surveillance shot from a market camera. It was Mira. His blood turned to ice. They knew. The council knew she existed. And royal variance. That meant they suspected her lineage was not just common Vargan. But that was impossible. Unless Adrian pushed the thought away. He could not deal with the implications of royal variance right now. All that mattered was that Mira was on a kill list. "Rhea," Adrian said, his voice surprisingly calm, the calm of a man who has decided to burn the world down. "I need a weapon." Rhea looked at him. "What kind of weapon?" "The kind that stops a dreadnought," Adrian said. He stood up. "The signal is going to go live in 12 hours. But they are not going to wait that long to grab the subjects. They are going to round them up." "Round who up?" "The kids," Adrian said. "They are coming for the kids." He turned to the door. "Where are you going?" Rhea shouted. "I am going to get my daughter," Adrian said. "And then I am going to remind the Blood Council why they used to fear the Sol Front." He touched the comms unit in his ear. "Mira," he said. Static. "Mira, answer me." Silence. "Mira." A crackle of audio. Then a voice that was not Mira's. It was smooth, cultured, and dripping with venom. "Mr. Cole," Cade Thorne said. "Your daughter is a charming conversationalist. She has quite a bit to say about mathematics." The world tilted on its axis. The roar in Adrian's ears drowned out the hum of the station. "If you touch her," Adrian whispered, "I will kill you. I will kill all of you." "Come to the Grand Hall at the summit opening," Cade said. "Bring the codes the Empress gave you. And perhaps if you are obedient, you can watch her die quickly." The line went dead. Adrian stood in the middle of the security center. The datapad in his hand cracked as his grip crushed the casing. Rhea Park stared at him. She saw the change happen. The tired mechanic vanished. The man who stood there now was terrifying. He radiated a cold, lethal intent that made the air in the room feel heavy. "Adrian," Rhea asked softly, "what do we do?" Adrian walked to the wall, where the emergency tactical gear was stored. He grabbed a heavy pulse rifle and checked the charge. "We are not fixing the grid anymore, Rhea," Adrian said. "We are going to war." He looked at the reflection in the black glass of the monitor. The war architect stared back. I won't lose her again, he said to the reflection. Not this time. The grand hall of the eclipse spire had been transformed into a suffocating chamber of crimson light. The artificial moon projected onto the massive dome of the ceiling was swollen and blood-red, casting long, distorted shadows across the gathered dignitaries. It was the Blood Moon Summit, a night of ancient Vargan tradition, now twisted into a political powder keg. The air smelled of ozone expensive perfume and the metallic tang of synthetic blood wine. Thousands of guests filled the tiered balconies, Vargan nobility in their flowing obsidian robes, their golden eyes gleaming in the dark. Human representatives in stiff, formal suits, looking like nervous prey invited to a predator's feast. And species from the outer rim, watching with the detached curiosity of neutral observers. Adrian Cole stood near the perimeter of the designated human safe zone, a roped-off section that felt less like a VIP area and more like a holding pen. He adjusted the collar of the formal tunic Rhea Park had forced him to wear. It was tight across the shoulders and hid the assortment of kinetic tools and localized shield generators he had strapped to his torso. Beside him, Mira fidgeted. She was dressed in a simple white dress that made her look younger than her 9 years. Her contact lenses were in place, hiding the vertical slit of her pupils, but she was vibrating with nervous energy. "This is statistically improbable," Mira whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "The structural integrity of this hall is designed for 3,000 occupants. There are at least 5,000 here. If the gravity stabilizers fail, the floor shear stress will exceed safety limits by 40%. "Stop doing the math, Mira," Adrian murmured, keeping his eyes on the crowd. He was scanning for threats, counting exits, analyzing the patrol patterns of the Royal Guard. "Just breathe, and keep your head down." "I hate it here," she hissed. "The red light hurts my eyes. And that man over there, the one with the silver scar, he keeps sniffing the air. He smells me, Dad." Adrian placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "He does not smell you. He smells the fear of the trade minister standing next to us. You are just a human girl with a genetic condition. That is the story. Stick to it." "Why do we have to be in the safe zone?" Mira asked, looking at the velvet ropes separating them from the main floor. "It feels like a cage." "Because, kiddo," Adrian said, forcing a half smile, "sometimes the safest place to be is the one place nobody looks. Besides, the buffet in the Vargan section is mostly raw steak. You would hate it." "I like rare steak," Mira muttered rebelliously. "Not today, you don't." A chime resonated through the hall, deep and mournful. The crowd fell silent. The lights dimmed further, focusing a single spotlight on the obsidian dais at the far end of the hall. "Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed allies," a herald announced, his voice amplified by the station's acoustics. "Her Imperial Majesty, the Empress of the Nocturne Dominion, Selene Nightclaw." Selene emerged from the shadows. She was breathtaking. She wore a ceremonial gown of deep crimson armor weave that looked like dragon scales, and a crown of black iron rested on her silver hair. She walked with the grace of a jungle cat, but Adrian, watching from the distance, saw the tension in her jaw. She looked tired. She looked like a woman walking to the gallows. The applause was polite but restrained. The Vargan traditionalists, the Blood Council, stood in the front row, their arms crossed, their expressions stony. Lord Cade Thorne was not among them. His absence set Adrian's teeth on edge. "She looks lonely," Mira whispered. "Queens usually are," Adrian replied softly. He checked his wrist comp. The energy fluctuations in the eclipse core were holding steady, but the carrier wave, the hidden signal, was still dormant. He tapped his earpiece. "Rhea," he whispered. "Status. Perimeter secure." Rhea Park's voice crackled back. "But I have lost sight of Cade Thorne. He is not in the VIP box. And Adrian, I am picking up unauthorized data packets moving through the internal grid. It is fast. Military grade." "Trace it," Adrian commanded. "And get ready to kill the main breaker on my mark." On the stage, Celine stepped up to the podium. She gripped the edges, her knuckles white. She looked out at the sea of faces, predator and prey, ruler and subject. For 3 centuries, Celine began her voice, ringing out clear and strong, defying the heavy silence. The blood purity edict has defined our empire. It has told us that strength lies in stagnation. That blood is the only currency that matters. A low growl rippled through the Vargan sections. It was a sound of warning. Celine did not flinch. But look around you. The universe is changing. We are not alone in the dark anymore. We have allies. We have friends. And yes, we have families who do not share our blood, but share our spirit. She took a deep breath. Tonight, I propose a new path. A path where the edict is abolished. Where those of mixed heritage are no longer abominations but bridges. Where humanity stands not as servants, but as equals. The reaction was immediate. The human delegation gasped in shock. The Vargan traditionalists erupted in shouts of outrage. Heresy, someone screamed from the front row. And then the lights flickered. It was not a dramatic blackout. It was a sickly, pulsing, the red light turning into a strobe effect. The hum of the station's gravity drive deepened, turning into a nauseating thrum that vibrated in the teeth. "Dad!" Mira grabbed Adrian's hand. "The math changed. The variables are wrong." "Rhea," Adrian barked into the comms. "Kill the breaker, now." "I can't," Rhea shouted back. "I am locked out. Someone has overridden the command codes. The core is cycling up. It is going to overload." Before Adrian could react, a massive explosion rocked the southern quadrant of the hall. It was a shaped charge designed to create noise and panic without structural collapse. The crowd screamed. The stampede began. "Stay with me," Adrian yelled, grabbing Mira. But the crowd surged. A wall of panicked bodies, human and Vargan, slammed into them. Adrian was shoved back, his grip on Mira's hand slipping. "Dad!" "Mira!" Adrian lunged, fighting against the tide of terrified diplomats. And then he saw them. 3 figures in dark tactical armor. Not royal guard, but something else cut through the crowd with impossible precision. They were not running away from the explosion. They were moving toward the chaos. They moved like smoke. One of them grabbed Mira. "No!" Adrian roared. He reached for his concealed stun baton, but a Vargan in the crowd panicked, and blind with fear, slammed an elbow into his ribs. Adrian went down, the breath driven from his lungs. By the time he scrambled back to his feet, gasping for air, the safe zone was empty. The strobe lights stopped. The hall plunged into darkness for a heartbeat, and then the main holographic projectors above the stage flared to life. A giant image filled the air, hovering above the Empress. It was Mira. She was being held by the scruff of her neck by a masked soldier, dangling like a rag doll. She looked tiny, terrified, her legs kicking uselessly. And stepping into the frame, holding a microphone with theatrical elegance, was Lord Cade Thorne. "Behold," Cade's voice boomed, echoing from every speaker, drowning out the screams of the crowd. "Behold the bridge your Empress speaks of." The crowd froze. The panic was replaced by a morbid, horrified fascination. Cade reached out and ripped the contact lenses from Mira's eyes. She blinked, tears streaming down her face. And in the high-definition projection, her eyes were revealed. One was human brown. The other was a fractured gold, the vertical pupil dilating in fear. A collective gasp went through the hall. "An abomination," Cade declared, his voice dripping with righteous disgust. "A mongrel. A pollution of our sacred bloodline. Hiding among you. Eating with you. Breathing your air." He looked directly at Celine, who stood frozen on the stage below her face, a mask of horror. "This is what your equality brings, Empress," Cade sneered. "Weakness, deception, disease." He pulled a jagged ceremonial dagger from his belt. The blade hummed with energy. "The core is unstable, because the station rejects this impurity." Cade lied, his voice rising to a fever pitch. "We must cleanse the signal. We must offer a sacrifice to restore the balance. Only blood can wash away the stain. He pressed the blade against Mira's throat. "Dad!" Mira screamed, her voice amplified, cracking with terror. On the stage, Celine stood paralyzed. She looked at the Blood Council, who were nodding in agreement. She looked at her royal guard, who seemed confused, unsure of where their loyalty lay. She was the Empress. If she moved to save a mongrel, she would confirm the Council's accusations. She would lose the throne. The civil war would begin instantly. She hesitated. That hesitation lasted only 2 seconds. But for Adrian Cole, watching from the floor of the hall, those 2 seconds were an eternity. They were the 2 seconds that broke the last chain, holding the war architect back. "Move," Adrian whispered. He did not run. He launched himself. He activated the kinetic dampeners in his boots, sliding across the polished floor, like a hockey puck weaving through the frozen crowd. He vaulted over the railing of the dais, landing on the stage, with a heavy metallic thud. The Royal Guard moved to intercept him. Spears of energy crossed his path. "Halt, human!" a captain roared. Adrian did not halt. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a spherical device, a localized gravity pulse grenade he had built from a warp drive stabilizer. He didn't throw it at them. He spiked it into the ground at his feet. Boom! The shockwave didn't explode. It pushed. A bubble of distorted gravity expanded outward, sending the 4 Vargan guards flying backward, as if they had been hit by a truck. Adrian kept moving. He sprinted up the stairs of the raised platform where Cade stood with Mira. Cade saw him coming. The Vargan Lord laughed, a cruel barking sound. "The father. How touching. Come to die with your mistake." Cade raised his free hand, summoning a bolt of dark necrotic energy, the ancient power of the Vargan bloodline. Adrian didn't dodge. He slid on his knees, activating the energy shield strapped to his left forearm. The bolt hit the shield with the force of a freight train. The impact cracked Adrian's radius bone. He felt the snap, the searing white-hot pain, but he used the momentum. He slid past Cade's guard, swept his leg, and kicked the back of Cade's knee. Cade stumbled, his grip on Mira loosening. Adrian lunged, grabbing Mira and pulling her behind him. He spun around, planting his feet wide. His shield arm raised his pulse rifle, drawn in his right hand, and leveled at Cade's chest. The hall was silent, deathly silent. Adrian stood alone. A human engineer, battered, bleeding, standing against a high lord of the Dominion, in the center of a hostile empire. He looked at Cade. Then, he looked up at the balcony where the snipers were taking aim. Then, he looked at Selene. His eyes were burning with a fury that made the Vargan's red eyes look dim. "I won't lose you again," Adrian screamed, his voice raw, tearing through the silence. He wasn't just talking to Mira. He was shouting at the universe. He was shouting at Selene. He was shouting at the memory of a burning colony on Mars. "If anyone wants her blood," Adrian snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger, "you go through me first." Cade Thorne straightened up, brushing the dust from his uniform. He looked at Adrian with amusement. "A brave speech, little human. But look around you. You are one man. We are a legion. And you are fragile." Cade snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the stage, 24 soldiers emerged. Not the Royal Guard. Cade's private militia. They raised their weapons. "Kill him," Cade ordered, "and fly the child." Selene took a step forward, her hand reaching out. "No, stop." "Silence, traitor," Cade roared at the Empress, silencing her with sheer audacity. "The Council has spoken," the soldiers fired. Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't close his eyes. He triggered the comms link in his ear. "Now, Dr. Eris," Adrian shouted. Deep in the bowels of the station, in the server room, where Mira's AI tutor was housed, a subroutine executed. It was a backdoor Adrian had spent 3 weeks coding. It wasn't a hack. It was a recalibration. The Eclipse core shifted. It didn't explode. It changed the local gravitational constant of the Grand Hall. But Adrian had coded a variable. Identify friend, foe signal. Every human security officer, every ally Rhea Park had vetted, and Adrian himself were wearing boots equipped with a specific magnetic frequency modulator, the devices Adrian had distributed under the guise of maintenance upgrades. The gravity in the hall suddenly spiked to 3 Gs. Wham! The effect was instantaneous. Every Vargan in the room, their biology dense and heavy to begin with, was slammed into the floor. The soldiers aiming at Adrian collapsed, their weapons clattering away as their own weight pinned them down. Cade Thorne fell to one knee, gasping, his bones creaking under the sudden pressure. But the humans stood. They were heavy, yes. It was hard to move. But the modulators in their boots created a localized buoyancy field, countering the crush. Adrian stood tall over the kneeling Vargan lord. "Fragile," Adrian spat the word out. "We built this station, you arrogant son of a bitch. We know where the off switch is." "Rhea now," Adrian commanded. From the balconies, Rhea Park and her security team, the only ones standing, opened fire. Not lethal rounds, but high-voltage shock blasts. The Vargan militia, pinned to the floor by gravity, were sitting ducks. They convulsed and went still. Adrian turned to Selene. The Empress was on her hands and knees, struggling against the crushing weight. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. She saw the man she thought was dead. She saw the war architect who had once held a line against an entire battalion. "Adrian!" she gasped. "The gravity." "I can adjust it for you," Adrian said, his voice hard. "If you pick a side." Selene looked at Cade, who was struggling to rise, his eyes glowing with a demonic purple light. Then she looked at Mira, huddled behind Adrian's legs, alive and safe. Selene roared. It wasn't a human scream. It was a wolf's howl. She reached deep inside herself, tapping into the primal rage that the Vargan usually suppressed. She stood up. She fought the 3 Gs of gravity with sheer brute strength, her muscles tearing her bones, groaning, but she stood. She looked at Adrian. "I pick her." Adrian tapped his wrist. Authorization accepted. He keyed the exception for Selene's biometric signature. The weight lifted from her shoulders instantly. Selene didn't waste a second. She reached up and tore the ceremonial gown, ripping the heavy fabric away to reveal the combat bodysuit underneath. She drew a pair of dual energy blades from her hidden sheaths. She stepped up beside Adrian, shoulder to shoulder. "You are late," Selene said, a fierce grin baring her fangs. "I was making a dramatic entrance," Adrian retorted, not looking at her, keeping his rifle trained on Cade. "You were the one hesitating." "I was considering the geopolitical ramifications," she snapped, deflecting a stray blaster bolt with her sword. "Next time, consider the guy with the bomb first." "I missed you, Cole." "Shut up and fight, Selene." Cade Thorne was not finished. He was a pure-blood lord descended from the first pack. He closed his eyes and began to chant in a language that made the air bleed. The shadows in the room began to move. They coalesced around him, swallowing the light. His form twisted, expanded. The sound of tearing meat and cracking bone filled the hall. "He is shifting," Mira screamed. "Dad, the energy readings, they are off the chart. He is tapping into the dark matter reserves." Cade exploded outward, no longer a humanoid. He was a shadow beast, a monstrosity of smoke and claws, standing 4 meters tall. He roared, a sound that shattered the glass of the observation deck. The gravity field didn't affect him anymore. He was phasing between physical and spectral. He swiped a massive claw, and 3 of Rhea's security officers were flung across the room like toys. "The core," Cade's voice boomed, sounding like it came from everywhere at once. "I will crack it open and feed this station to the void." He lunged, not at Adrian, not at Selene. He lunged at the exposed power conduit behind the stage. "He is going for structural weakness," Adrian realized. "If he hits that, the station breaks in half." "I will hold him," Selene shouted. She leaped, her blades glowing white-hot. She slammed into the shadow beast, a whirlwind of steel and light. She slashed at his flank, carving deep wounds into the smoke, but the beast healed almost instantly. Cade backhanded her. Celine flew backward, crashing into the podium, shattering it. Adrian saw the opening. He could shoot. He had a clear shot at the beast's throat, the one physical point that remained solid. A kill shot. But as he raised the rifle, Cade's tail whipped around. It wasn't aiming for him. It was aiming for Mira. It was a distraction. Cade knew Adrian. He knew the human would always choose the heart over the victory. Time slowed down. If Adrian took the shot, Cade would die. But the tail would crush Mira. If Adrian saved Mira, Cade would reach the conduit and destroy the station. HFY is not about being the strongest, Adrian thought. It is about enduring what others cannot. Adrian dropped the rifle. He threw himself over Mira, curling his body around her, turning his back to the monster. "Shields max," he screamed. The massive shadow tail slammed into Adrian's back. Crack. The sound of his ribs breaking was louder than the explosion. The energy shield on his back overloaded and shattered. The force drove him into the ground, crushing the air from his lungs. He tasted copper. His vision went white. But Mira was untouched. "Dad!" she cried. Adrian coughed, blood spattering the floor. He couldn't move his legs. But his mind was still working. The war architect was still plotting. Cade laughed, turning his back on the broken human to face the conduit. "Pathetic. You chose sentiment over survival." "No," Adrian wheezed his hand, fumbling for his belt. He pulled out the datapad he had synced to the core earlier. "I chose bait," Cade froze. "What?" Adrian's fingers, trembling and stained with blood, tapped the screen. "Mira," Adrian rasped. "What happens when you introduce a positive feedback loop into a spectral energy matrix?" Mira, tears streaming down her face, looked at the console, then at the beast. Her brain worked through the terror. "It creates a harmonic resonance. It shatters the containment." "Exactly," Adrian smiled through bloody teeth. He hadn't been trying to stabilize the core. He had been turning the entire Eclipse core into a giant magnet for dark matter energy. And Cade was made of dark matter. "Eat this," Adrian whispered. He hit execute. The Eclipse core didn't explode. It inhaled. A vortex of pure white energy erupted from the conduit Cade was trying to destroy. But instead of blowing outward, it latched onto Cade. The shadow beast screamed. It was a sound of absolute agony. The energy of the station was being siphoned through him. The core was using Cade as a fuse. "No," Cade howled, clawing at the air. "It burns, it burns." "It is just physics, Cade." Adrian shouted, his voice weak but triumphant. "You wanted to be powerful here. Have all the power." The spectral form of the beast began to unravel. The smoke was sucked into the vents. The claws dissolved. Cade was being pulled apart atom, by the very energy he sought to control. Celine, recovering from the blow, saw what Adrian had done. She scrambled to her feet. "The containment field!" she shouted. "It is going to backlash!" She sprinted to Adrian and Mira. She threw herself over them, wrapping her armored wings, a manifestation of her royal form, around the two frail humans. Flash. The room was consumed by blinding white light. A shockwave of pure kinetic force blasted outward, knocking every remaining combatant unconscious. Then silence. The red light of the blood moon faded. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the hall in a harsh, cold white. In the center of the stage, the smoke cleared. Lord Cade Thorne lay on the ground. He was no longer a beast. He was a shriveled, unconscious husk. Stripped of his power, his armor fused to the floor. He was alive, but broken. Under the protective shelter of the Empress's wings, Adrian opened his eyes. He looked at Mira. She was shaking, but unharmed. He looked at Celine. She was hovering over them, her face bruised, her silver hair matted with dust. She looked fierce. She looked beautiful. "You are an idiot," Celine whispered, her voice trembling. "You took a hit from a shadow beast. You have 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung." "Worth it," Adrian wheezed. He tried to sit up and failed. Mira grabbed his hand, squeezing it tight. You did the math, Dad. You knew the core would target the highest energy density. You used him as a lightning rod. Smart kid, Adrian coughed. He looked around the hall. The Vargan were groaning, starting to stand up as the gravity normalized. The humans were helping them. The lines of the safe zone were gone, trampled in the fight. Adrian looked at the Blood Council members in the front row. They looked terrified. They looked at Cade's broken body, then at the human engineer, who had defeated a High Lord with a tablet and a hug. Adrian pointed a shaking finger at them. This, Adrian, gasped, his voice, amplified by the silence of the room. This is what happens when you touch my family. He slumped back against Celine's arm, the darkness finally claiming him. The last thing he heard was Celine screaming for a medic and Mira's voice, fierce and strong, ordering the Royal Guard to back off. The war architect had won, but the father needed a nap. The silence that followed the Battle of the Grand Hall was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a stopped heart, waiting for the defibrillator to kick in. The Eclipse Spire, usually a humming beehive of commerce and diplomacy, lay wounded. Smoke drifted through the high-vaulted ceilings of the promenade, smelling of burnt ozone and melted tritanium. The artificial gravity, restored, but jittery, made the stomach lurch unpredictably every few minutes. In the center of the devastation, a containment field flickered into existence around the fallen form of Lord Cade Thorne. He was no longer a shadow beast. He was just a man, a Vargan man, shriveled and gasping, his skin gray and cracking like dried mud. Adrian Cole lay on a stretcher a few meters away, his vision swimming in and out of focus. The pain in his chest was a dull, heavy roar, muffled by the cocktail of painkillers the medical drones had already injected into his neck. He watched as Rhea Park stood over Cade. She did not look triumphant. She looked exhausted. "Secure him," Rhea ordered her team. "Level 10 restraints. Dampening collar. If he blinks in a way I do not like, sedate him until next Tuesday." "You cannot," Cade wheezed, his voice a dry rattle. "I am a Lord of the Blood Council." "You are a terrorist, Cade," Rhea said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And you are the best witness we have ever had." Adrian tried to laugh, but it turned into a cough that tasted of copper. He felt a small, cold hand grip his own. He turned his head. Mira was there. Her dress was ruined, covered in dust and soot. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes, one brown, one gold, were fierce. "Don't move," she commanded, sounding exactly like a miniature version of the head nurse. "Dr. Eris says you have 3 fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and severe kinetic trauma. If you move, I will sedate you myself." "You are grounded," Adrian rasped, squeezing her hand weakly. "For hacking the core and for saving the world without permission." "I learned from the best," Mira sniffed, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Beyond them, the political fallout was already beginning. The Vargan nobility were huddled in groups, whispering, casting fearful glances at the humans who were now guarding the exits. The illusion of Vargan invulnerability had been shattered not by a fleet of warships, but by a single human engineer who understood physics better than they understood their own magic. And standing amidst the wreckage of the stage was Empress Celine Nightclaw. She had not put her ceremonial robe back on. She stood in her torn combat suit, covered in dust, her silver hair wild. She looked less like a monarch and more like a survivor. She walked to the edge of the broken platform. The cameras were still rolling. The feed was still live, broadcasting to every screen on the station and every ship in the fleet. "Citizens of the Dominion," Celine said. Her voice did not need amplification. It carried the weight of absolute authority. The hall went deathly quiet. "Tonight, you saw a monster," Celine continued. "But it was not the child they called an abomination. The monster was the hatred we have allowed to fester in our own hearts." She gestured to where Mira knelt beside Adrian. "That child," Celine said, her voice shaking slightly before steeling itself, "is under my protection. Not because she is a subject, but because she is proof that we are wrong. The blood purity edict has not preserved us. It has poisoned us." A murmur went through the crowd. This was treason against her own history. Effective immediately, Celine declared, the edict is suspended. A tribunal will be established to investigate the crimes of the Blood Council, and any act of violence against a citizen of mixed heritage will be treated as an act of treason against the crown. She looked directly at the camera, her golden eyes burning. We will not go back to the dark. We will evolve, or we will die. Adrian closed his eyes, letting the darkness take him. The war was over, but the cleanup was just beginning. The medical wing of Sector 1 was usually reserved for royalty. The sheets were made of real silk, the air smelled of lavender instead of antiseptic, and the view from the window overlooked the nebula. Adrian hated it. He had been awake for 2 days, and he was already trying to hack the locking mechanism on his bed frame. "Stop it," Mira said without looking up from her datapad. She was sitting in a plush chair next to his bed, her legs swinging back and forth. She was wearing a new set of clothes, clean-fitting, and openly displaying a small pin with the Alliance crest. "I am fine, Mira," Adrian grumbled. The biogel knitted the ribs. "The lung is at 90% capacity. I can leave." "Your heart rate is elevated," Mira countered, "and your cortisol levels are still high. You are staying." Adrian sighed and slumped back against the pillows. He looked at his daughter. She looked different. Not just the clothes. She wasn't hunching her shoulders anymore. She wasn't hiding her eyes. "So," Adrian said, trying to keep his voice light, "I heard a rumor." "What rumor?" "I heard that, while I was busy grappling with a shadow monster, a certain 9-year-old girl picked up a kinetic stool and knocked 3 Vargan commandos unconscious." Mira blushed slightly. "There were only 2. The third one tripped over the first one." "Still," Adrian whistled, "that is my girl. Although we need to work on your form. You use your hips to swing a chair, not your shoulders." "I was improvising," Mira said defensively. Then her smile faded. She put the datapad down. "Dad, yeah, I was scared." The playfulness vanished from the room. Adrian reached out and took her hand. "I know, kiddo. I was too." "Not for me," Mira whispered. "For you. When he hit you, when I heard your bones crack, I thought—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Adrian pulled her toward him. She climbed onto the edge of the bed and buried her face in his chest, careful of his healing ribs. "I am not going anywhere," Adrian murmured into her hair. "I told you. I won't lose you again. That includes me not dying on you." "You take too many risks," Mira mumbled into his hospital gown. "Calculated risks," Adrian corrected. "There is a difference. The margin for error on that gravity inversion was 0.002%, she argued. "That is plenty of margin," Adrian grinned. "I once landed a shuttle with less." They sat in silence for a moment, just breathing, reaffirming that they were both solid, both real, both alive. The door chimed. "Enter," Adrian said, shifting into a more protective posture instantly. It was not a nurse. It was a delegation. 3 humans in expensive suits walked in, led by Director Vance the Weasel, who had been standing next to Cade Thorne, now miraculously wearing a pin of support for the Empress. "Mr. Cole," Vance beamed his smile, looking like it was glued on. "And the little hero Mira. So good to see you recovering." Adrian stared at him. "Get out," Vance faltered. "Excuse me. I said get out. Unless you are here to change my bedpan, you have no business in this room." "Mr. Cole, please." Vance stepped forward, holding out a velvet box. "We are here on behalf of the Alliance Council. We want to formally recognize your bravery, the Star of Valor, and a promotion. Director of Station Security. With a full pension, of course." Adrian looked at the medal in the box. It was gold. It was shiny. It was worthless. "You want to give me a medal," Adrian said, his voice quiet and dangerous. "Where were you when Cade Thorne took my daughter? Where were you when the safe zone turned into a trap?" "We were detained," Vance stammered. "The situation was chaotic." "You were hiding," Adrian said. "You were waiting to see who won. And now that the Empress has won, you want to pin a medal on me, so you can look like you were on the right side of history." He pointed to the door. "Take your medal, Vance. Take your promotion. I do not want to be your poster boy. I do not want to be a virtual hero for you to display in your lobby." "But Mr. Cole," Vance sweated, "you are a symbol. The public demands it." "You want to give me something." Adrian sat up wincing as his ribs protested. "Give me papers." "Papers?" "Adoption papers," Adrian said. "Full, legal, irrevocable custody of Mira Cole. Recognized by human and Vargan law. No medical anomaly status. No ward of the state. My daughter, legally." "That is unprecedented for a hybrid," Vance muttered. "The legal framework." "Change the framework," Adrian snapped. "Or I will release the logs I recorded of you agreeing with Cade Thorne's plan to call the Half-Bloods." Vance went pale. "Did you record that?" "I record everything," Adrian lied. He hadn't recorded that specific conversation, but Vance didn't know that. "And I want a seat on the Reform Committee. Not a voting seat, a voice. When you write the new laws for the hybrids, I want to be in the room. To make sure you do not screw it up." Vance looked at the terrifying man in the hospital bed, then at the girl who had allegedly taken out 2 commandos with a chair. "I will have the papers drawn up immediately," Vance said. He placed the velvet box on the table. "Keep the medal, please, for the press release." He fled the room. Adrian picked up the velvet box and tossed it into the waste disposal unit. "Nice negotiation," Mira said, impressed. "Did you really record him?" "No," Adrian winked. "But guilt is a powerful hard drive. It stores everything." Later that evening, the visitor Adrian had been dreading finally arrived. The lights in the room were dimmed. Mira had fallen asleep in the spare cot, exhausted by the adrenaline crash. The door did not chime. It simply slid open. Celine walked in. She was not the Empress tonight. She wore a simple gray tunic and trousers, her feet bare, on the cold floor. Her hair was tied back in a messy braid. She walked with a slight limp. She stopped at the foot of his bed. She did not look at him. She looked at Mira, sleeping. "She is beautiful," Celine whispered. She looks like you," Adrian finished, his voice hard. "Around the eyes. When she is angry." Celine looked up at him. Her face was a map of regret. The immortality of the Vargan usually kept them looking timeless, but tonight, Celine looked every one of her years. "How are you, Adrian?" "I have been better," Adrian said. "I have also been dead, so I guess this is an improvement." Celine flinched at the reference. She pulled a chair over, not the one Mira had sat in, but one further away. She sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "I came to thank you," she said. "You saved my empire. Again." "I didn't do it for your empire," Adrian said. "I did it for her." "I know." Celine looked down at her hands. "Adrian, about the past. About the colony." "Don't," Adrian said, turning his head away to look out the window. "I do not want to hear your justifications, Celine. I heard them 15 years ago. The greater good. Necessary sacrifice. It is just a fancy word for murder." "I was wrong," Celine said. The words hung in the air. Simple. Stark. Adrian turned back to look at her. "I was young," Celine said, tears welling in her golden eyes. "I had just ascended to the throne. The council was whispering in my ear that humanity would never stop fighting unless we broke you. They told me that if I showed mercy, I was weak. So I chose power. I chose to be the Empress instead of the woman who loved you." She took a shaky breath. And every day since then I have paid for it. I won the war, and I lost my soul. I thought if I built a perfect peace, if I made the alliance work, it would balance the ledger. But it didn't. She looked at Adrian, her gaze intense and pleading. When I saw you on that stage, when you stood in front of Cade, I realized that you are 10 times the ruler I ever was. You didn't care about politics. You didn't care about the odds. You just protected what mattered. Adrian looked at her. He wanted to hate her. He had spent 15 years fueling his engine of hate. It was a familiar fuel. It burned hot and clean. But looking at her now, this broken, lonely woman sitting in a plastic hospital chair, he couldn't find the hate. It had burned out in the grand hall, consumed by the same fire that destroyed Cade. You killed them, Celine, Adrian said softly. My wife, my unborn child. You can't fix that. You can't apologize for that. I know, Celine whispered. I know I can't. So what do you want from me? I want you to help me fix what is left, Celine said. I cannot do this alone, Adrian. The council is gone, but the rot is deep. The humans do not trust me. The Vargan do not respect me. I need a conscience. I need someone who will tell me when I am being a monster. Adrian looked at Mira sleeping. He thought about the world she was going to grow up in. A world where she was a symbol, a target, a bridge. If he walked away now, if he took Mira and ran to the outer rim, the system would collapse. Another Cade Thorne would rise, and they would be hunting Mira forever. Justice wasn't about hurting the person who hurt you. Justice was about making sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. I am not going to be your consort, Celine, Adrian said, his voice firm. And I am not going to be your general. I do not want a general, Celine said. I want a partner, a friend, if that is even possible. Adrian sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Friends is a strong word. Let us start with co-conspirators in keeping my daughter alive. Celine let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a decade. A small, tentative smile touched her lips. I can work with that. And Celine, yes, you owe me a new coffee machine. Cade smashed mine, Celine laughed. It was a wet, choked sound, but it was genuine. I will buy you the factory, Adrian. Just the machine is fine, Adrian said. He closed his eyes, exhaustion finally reclaiming him. Now get out of here. If the nurse finds the Empress in my room after visiting hours, she will yell at me. Celine stood up. She walked to the door, then paused. She looked back at him. Good night, War Architect. Good night, Wolf, Adrian mumbled. 2 weeks later, the tribunal chamber was packed. It was not a show trial. It was a reckoning. Lord Cade Thorne stood in a glass cage in the center of the room. He was stripped of his finery, wearing a simple gray prisoner's uniform. His skin was sallow, his eyes dim. The energy drain had left him permanently weakened, unable to access the Vargan abilities he had prized so highly. Adrian Cole stood at the witness podium. He was dressed in a simple suit, leaning slightly on a cane, a concession to his healing leg, though he could walk without it. He just liked having a weapon handy. The accused claims, the High Justicar, a neutral artificial intelligence, intoned that his actions were motivated by the preservation of the Vargan species. He argues that the integration of humanity is a biological threat. Cade sneered from his cage. It is the truth. Look at them. They are weak. They are insects. Mixing our blood with theirs is suicide. The crowd rumbled. There were still sympathizers in the room. Adrian leaned into the microphone. You talk a lot about strength, Cade, Adrian said, his voice calm, amplified across the chamber. You talk about purity, but let us look at the data. He tapped the podium, bringing up a holographic display. It showed the footage of the battle. It showed Cade turning into a monster, and it showed Adrian, a human, outsmarting him. You had ancient magic, Adrian said. You had a private army. You had the element of surprise, and you lost. to a mechanic with a tablet and 3 broken ribs. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Cade's face turned purple. "You did not lose because we are weak," Adrian continued, his voice hardening. "You lost because hatred is inefficient." He turned to address the gallery, looking directly at the remaining Vargan nobles. "Hate consumes resources. It blinds you to variables. It makes you predictable. Cade Thorne hated humanity so much that he tried to eat a star to prove he was better than us. And that star ate him." Adrian looked back at Cade. "You are not a martyr, Cade. You are just a bad engineer. You built a machine fueled by hate and you forgot to install an off switch. That is not strength. That is suicide." He turned to the Justicar. "The prosecution rests." Cade screamed insults as he was dragged away, sentenced to life imprisonment in the null void, a prison dimension where no energy existed. He would spend eternity in the dark, hungry and powerless. As Adrian walked out of the tribunal, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He hadn't killed Cade. He hadn't executed him in the heat of battle. He had dismantled him. He had stripped him of his ideology and left him naked before history. That was justice. The morning of the first day of the new term at the Spire Academy was chaotic. Shuttles were buzzing overhead, parents were rushing their children to the gates, and the air smelled of synthetic nervous sweat. Mira stood by the gate adjusting her backpack straps. She was wearing the standard blue uniform of the academy. No hiding, no contacts. Her eyes, one brown one, gold shone in the morning light. "Do you have your lunch?" Adrian asked, fussing with her collar. "Yes, Dad." "Do you have your stun baton?" "Dad," Mira hissed, looking around. "You are not allowed to bring weapons to school." "It is a calculator," Adrian winked. "That delivers 50,000 volts, just in case." "I am not taking it," Mira said firmly. She looked at the imposing gates of the academy. For the first time, the no hybrid sign was gone. In its place was a holographic banner, Unity in Knowledge. "Are you nervous?" a voice asked. Celine stepped out of a black diplomatic shuttle. She was wearing casual clothes, well casual for an Empress, a silk trench coat and sunglasses. Her security detail stayed discreetly back. "A little," Mira admitted. She looked at Celine. "Are you really my godmother now?" "Officially," Celine smiled. "It means if your father refuses to buy you a pony, I can overrule him." "We are on a space station," Adrian pointed out. "Where are we going to put a pony?" "I have a palace," Celine shrugged. "Plenty of room," Mira laughed. It was a bright, happy sound that seemed to chase away the lingering shadows of the war. "Go on," Adrian said, giving her a gentle nudge. "Go show them how smart you are. And do not correct the teachers unless they are wrong by more than 5%. 10%, Mira negotiated. "Deal." Mira ran toward the gates. She stopped, halfway turned around and waved. "Bye, Dad, bye, Aunt Celine." She disappeared into the crowd of students, human Vargan, and everything in between. Adrian and Celine stood side by side watching her go. They weren't holding hands. They weren't embracing. But they were standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. "Aunt Celine," Adrian raised an eyebrow. "It was the best title we could agree on without causing a constitutional crisis," Celine said. She took off her sunglasses. "She is going to be okay, isn't she?" "She is going to be brilliant," Adrian said. "She has your stubbornness and my brains." "Excuse me," Celine scoffed. "My brains built an empire." "And my brains saved it," Adrian countered. They looked at each other. For a moment the banter faded. "Thank you, Adrian," Celine said softly, "for letting me be part of this, for letting me try." "Do not make me regret it," Adrian said. But there was no malice in his voice. "Sunday night. Dinner. Sector 9. I am making pasta." "Real pasta?" Celine asked. "Not that synthetic sludge." "Real pasta. I know a guy who smuggles flour from Earth." "I will bring the wine," Celine said. "And Adrian." Yeah, I will leave the crown at home. Good, Adrian said, turning to walk back to the transit station, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the deck. Because my apartment is small and that thing is huge. He walked away, leaving the Empress of the Nocturne Dominion, smiling on the sidewalk. The scars were still there. The memories of the dead still haunted the corners of his mind at night. But as Adrian watched the sun rise over the curve of the station, he realized something. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. And for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't looking over his shoulder. He was looking forward to it. The aroma of garlic and sautéed onions wafted through the ventilation system of the apartment in Sector 9, fighting a losing battle against the sterile metallic scent of the eclipse spire. It had been 5 years since the Blood Moon Summit, and while the galaxy had changed, Adrian Cole's kitchen ventilation had not. "You are burning the garlic," a voice noted from the doorway. Adrian did not look up from the pan. "I am caramelizing it. There is a difference, Your Majesty. It is a subtle chemical reaction involving sugar and heat. I would not expect a species that drinks synthetic hemoglobin to understand the nuance." Empress Selene Nightclaw stepped into the small kitchen. She was not wearing her ceremonial armor, nor the silk robes of state. She wore a pair of comfortable, loose-fitting trousers and a sweater that looked suspiciously like one Adrian had lost 2 months ago. "I rule 12 star systems," Selene said, leaning against the counter and stealing a slice of raw bell pepper. "I think I can understand the concept of burning food, Adrian." "Stop stealing the ingredients," Adrian swatted her hand away with a wooden spoon. "And set the table. Mira will be back from her entrance exams in 20 minutes. "I am the Empress of the Nocturne Dominion," Selene muttered, though she picked up the stack of plates obediently. "I command fleets. I crush rebellions. And yet here I am, setting the table for pasta night." "It keeps you humble," Adrian grinned. He looked at her for a moment. The years had been kind to Selene, or perhaps the lifting of the burden of the blood purity edict had simply made her look younger. The lines of exhaustion that had etched her face during the war were softer now. She looked less like a monument to history, and more like a person. Adrian turned back to the stove, his own reflection caught in the chrome of the range hood. His hair was grayer now, the silver spreading from his temples to claim most of his head. He walked with a cane, a sleek black carbon fiber rod that concealed a high-frequency blade, but he needed it less and less. The limp was a reminder, a souvenir of the day he had held the line against a shadow beast. The door chime signaled Mira's arrival. "I am home," Mira's voice echoed from the hallway, followed by the heavy thud of a bag hitting the floor. "And I am starving. If we are having nutrient paste again, I am defecting to the Vargan Diplomatic Corps." "Pasta," Adrian called out. "Real pasta, smuggled from Earth Sector 4. Mira walked into the kitchen. At 14 years old, she was a striking fusion of her heritage. She had Adrian's height and the human warmth of her skin, but her movements possessed the fluid, predatory grace of the Vargan. Her eyes, one brown, one gold, were no longer hidden behind contacts. In the new Eclipse Alliance, they were a badge of honor. "How did the exams go?" Selene asked, pouring 3 glasses of water. "Easy," Mira shrugged, hopping onto a stool. "The astro-engineering section was a joke. They asked me to calculate the shear stress of a slip-space drive entry. I gave them the answer, and then I corrected their formula for dark matter displacement. The proctor looked like he wanted to cry. "That is my girl," Adrian said, placing the large bowl of pasta on the table. "Terrorizing academics with math." "I also applied for the diplomatic track," Mira added, casually reaching for the bread. Adrian paused. "Diplomacy? I thought you wanted to build engines." "I do," Mira said. She reached up and touched the necklace she always wore, a jagged shard of dull metal on a simple silver chain. "But engines just move ships. Diplomacy moves people. Someone has to bridge the gap, Dad, You and Aunt Celine started it. I want to finish it. Adrian looked at the shard of metal around her neck. He felt a familiar pang of old grief. He had found that shard in the wreckage of the medical colony on Mars, 15 years ago. He had found it, next to the crying infant he had rescued Mira. He had always assumed it was a piece of shrapnel, from the building where his wife had died. He had given it to Mira when she was old enough, a talisman of the mother she never knew. "You will be a great diplomat," Celine said softly, her eyes lingering on the necklace with an expression Adrian could not quite read. "You have a talent for navigating two worlds." "And for arguing," Adrian added, sitting down. "Mostly the arguing." The dinner was a chaotic affair, filled with the kind of comfortable noise that only family can generate. They debated the new trade tariffs. Celine thought they were too lenient. Adrian thought they were necessary for the Rim colonies. They joked about the Vargan ambassador, who had accidentally insulted a terraforming guild by eating the decorative plants. It was perfect. It was normal. And because Adrian Cole was a man who had spent his life waiting for the other shoe to drop, he should have known that perfection was usually the calm before the storm. The storm arrived 3 days later, not with a bang, but with a digital chime on Adrian's secure terminal. Adrian was in his office at the Alliance Security Headquarters. The office was a glass-walled enclosure overlooking the busy docks of the Spire. His official title was Senior Strategic Consultant, which meant he was the guy the Alliance called when they had a problem that required bypassing the rulebook. "Enter," Adrian said, not looking up from his report. The door slid open, revealing a man Adrian did not know. He was a Vargan, old and scarred, wearing the gray robes of the Royal Archivists. "Master Cole," Vargan bowed stiffly. "I am Archivist Valerius. I serve the Imperial Truth." "I know who you are," Adrian said, leaning back in his chair. "You are the people who dig up the bodies everyone else tries to bury. What can I do for you, Valerius?" "I have been cataloging the sealed files of the Blood Council," Valerius said, his voice dry as dust. "Following the tribunal, the Empress ordered a full transparency review. We are declassifying everything." "Good. Sunlight is the best disinfectant." "Indeed." Valerius approached the desk and placed a physical data slate on the surface. "However, I found a file that confused me. It was heavily encrypted, buried under a false header about grain shipments. But the encryption key was not the Council's." Adrian frowned. "Whose was it?" "It was a royal cipher," Valerius said. "From the personal databases of the Empress, dated 15 years ago." Adrian picked up the slate. "Why bring this to me? Why not take it to Celine?" "Because," Valerius said, his golden eyes meeting Adrian's. "The file references a specific location. The Ares Medical Colony, Mars Sector 4. The air in the office seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian's hand tightened on the slate. "Leave it." "There is something else," Valerius hesitated. "The file is not titled Casualty Report. It is titled Project Eclipse Child." Valerius bowed again and left the room. Adrian sat alone in the silence. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a slow, heavy rhythm of dread. He activated the slate. The file opened. It was a log. A series of medical reports, tactical communications, and genetic scans. Adrian read. Entry 404 subject, Alara, admitted. Gestation week 34. Complications due to hybrid incompatibility. Mother's vitals failing. Alara. Adrian stopped breathing. Alara was his wife's name. He scrolled down, his fingers trembling. Entry 405, Blood Council. Hunter squads detected in orbit. They know about the hybrid. Extermination order confirmed. Entry 406, priority override from High Command Empress Nightclaw. Initiate protocol Scorched Earth. Bombardment authorized. Cover story, Rebel insurrection. Entry 407, extraction successful. Mother died during the procedure. Fetus secured in stasis pod Alpha 9. Colony destruction confirmed. No witnesses. Adrian stared at the words. Bombardment authorized. Fetus secured. He looked at the date stamp. It was the day of the bombing. The day he had watched the sky turn to fire. The day he had dug through the rubble and he had found a baby. A baby in a stasis pod that had been partially damaged, hidden beneath a collapsed beam. He had assumed the pod was a desperate attempt by a doctor to save a random patient. He had assumed the baby was an orphan of the war. He had adopted her. He had named her Mira. He stood up the chair, crashing backward. Computer. Adrian's voice was a ragged whisper. Run a genetic cross-reference. Mira Cole and Alara Vance. The computer chirped. Processing match confirmed. Probability, 99.99%. Familial relation mother and daughter. The room spun. Mira was not just an orphan he had saved. Mira was his daughter, his biological daughter, the child he thought had died in Alara's womb. And Celine knew. Celine had ordered the bombing, not to kill them, to save the baby. But she had never told him. She had let him believe for 15 years that his family was dead. She had let him adopt his own daughter as a stranger. Why? Adrian looked at the file again. Entry 408. The Blood Council believes the lineage is ended. The child must remain a ghost. If the father knows his grief will be genuine. If he acts, they will find her. Silence is the only shield. Adrian felt a scream building in his chest, a mix of relief, horror, and a fury so pure it felt like white heat. He grabbed the slate and stormed out of the office. He didn't need a cane. He needed answers. The sun was setting over the eclipsed spire, casting long shadows across the living room of the apartment. Celine was sitting on the sofa, reading a book on Terran history. Mira was in her room packing for the academy. The door didn't open. It was shoved open with enough force to rattle the frame. Celine looked up, sensing the shift in the air instantly. She saw Adrian standing there, the data slate in his hand, his eyes burning with a fire she hadn't seen since the Grand Hall. Adrian, Celine, stood up slowly, putting the book aside. Adrian walked into the room. He didn't shout. He didn't throw things. He was dangerously, terrifyingly quiet. Project Eclipse Child, Adrian said. He tossed the slate onto the coffee table. It slid across the surface and stopped at Celine's feet. Celine looked at the slate. She didn't reach for it. She didn't feign ignorance. Her face paled, the blood draining away until she looked like a marble statue. "I see," she whispered. "You see?" Adrian's voice cracked. "That is all you have to say, I see." "Adrian, listen to me." "Did you know?" Adrian demanded, stepping closer. "When I found her in the rubble, when I adopted her, when I raised her for 9 years in the shadows, did you know she was mine?" Celine closed her eyes. "Yes." "And you said nothing?" "I couldn't." Celine opened her eyes, and they were filled with tears. The Blood Council was watching everything. Adrian Cade Thorne had spies in every sector. If I had approached you, if I had told you that Alara's child survived, they would have killed her. They would have killed you. "So you let me mourn," Adrian shouted. "You made me believe I had lost everything. You let me hate you for 15 years for a murder you didn't commit." "I let you hate me because your hate kept you alive," Celine shouted back, her composure shattering. "Your grief was real, Adrian. That was what sold the lie. If you had known she was alive, you would have tried to run. You would have slipped up, and Cade would have found her." "You ordered the bombing," Adrian said, his voice trembling. "You bombed the colony where my wife was dying." "It was the only way to cover the extraction team." Celine was crying now, the tears streaming down her face. "Alara was already gone, Adrian. The complications of human hybrid biology were not understood then. She was dying before the ships even arrived. I ordered the strike to wipe the records, to make the council believe the abomination was dust." The bedroom door opened. Mira stood there. She was holding a shirt she had been folding. Her face was blank, her eyes wide. "Mom," Mira whispered. The word hung in the air, fragile as glass. She looked at Adrian. "My mother was Alara." Adrian turned to her. The anger in his chest collided with a wave of overwhelming love. He rushed to her, falling to his knees, grabbing her hands. Yes, Adrian choked out. Yes, she was. And I didn't know. I swear to you, Mira, I didn't know. Mira looked at the necklace. She wore the shard of metal. This, she touched the shard. It wasn't shrapnel. It was part of the stasis pod, Celine said softly from across the room. Your mother held onto it until the end. She made me promise. She made me promise to save you. Mira looked at Celine. You saved me. I tried, Celine said, her voice hollow. I saved your life. But I stole your father's peace. And for that, I can never be forgiven. Celine turned away. She couldn't look at them. The shame was a physical weight crushing her shoulders. She walked toward the door. Where are you going? Adrian asked. He hadn't stood up. He was still kneeling before Mira, holding his daughter, his true daughter. To the palace, Celine said without turning around. You have your truth, Adrian. And you have your family. I have done my duty. She reached for the door handle. Stop, Mira said. Celine froze. You don't get to leave, Mira said. Her voice was shaking, but it was strong. She walked past Adrian, crossing the room to stand behind the Empress. You don't get to make decisions for us anymore. That is what you did wrong. You decided what we needed to know. Celine turned slowly. Mira, You lied, Mira said. For 15 years. You let my father live in hell. I did. But you also saved my life, Mira said. She reached out and took Celine's hand. The Vargan Empress flinched as if burned, but Mira held on. And you came back. You helped him raise me. You fought for us in the Grand Hall. Mira looked back at Adrian. Dad, she said. She saved us. Adrian stood up slowly. He looked at Celine. He saw the woman who had made a terrible, impossible choice in the middle of a war. He saw the woman who had sacrificed her own happiness, her own reputation to keep a promise to a dying human woman. He thought about the phrase he had shouted in the Grand Hall. I won't lose you again. He realized now that he had been fighting a ghost. He had been fighting to save a memory, never realizing that the future was standing right in front of him. And if he let Celine walk out that door now, he would be losing his family again. Not to death, but to pride. HFY wasn't about being right. It was about being big enough to carry the weight of the truth. Adrian walked across the room. He stopped in front of Celine. You are a terrible communicator, Adrian said. Celine let out a sob that was half laugh. I know. And you are manipulative, secretive, and infuriating. I am an Empress. It comes with the job. Adrian reached out and took her other hand. But you are not a murderer, Adrian said softly. And you are not alone. He pulled her into him. It wasn't a romantic embrace, not entirely. It was a collision of two broken people, holding each other up. Celine buried her face in his shoulder and wept, the iron facade of the Wolf Queen finally melting away. Mira joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them. 3 people. 1 messy, complicated, constructed family. I am still mad, Adrian whispered into Celine's hair. Just for the record, I am furious. I know, Celine whispered back. I will spend the next 100 years making it up to you. Start with tonight, Adrian said. We have pasta to finish, and it is getting cold. The departure terminal of the Eclipse Spire was a cavernous hall of glass and steel, echoing with the announcements of departures to 100 different worlds. Adrian stood by Gate 7, leaning on his cane, though it was mostly for show now. Mira stood before him, looking like a stranger in her cadet uniform. She looked older. She looked ready. You have your data pad, Adrian asked for the 10th time. Yes, Dad. You have the emergency beacon. Yes, Dad. You have the pepper spray I modified to incapacitate a Wookiee. Dad, Mira laughed, rolling her eyes. I am going to the Alliance Fleet Academy. It is the safest place in the galaxy. That is what they said about the Titanic, Adrian muttered. Celine stepped forward. She smoothed the collar of Mira's uniform. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at the young woman who was the living proof of her greatest sin and her greatest redemption. "Be safe," Celine said, "and remember, if anyone gives you trouble, call the Empress." Mira grinned. "No," Celine smiled, glancing at Adrian. "Call your father. He is much scarier than I am." The boarding call chimed. Mira hugged Celine tight. Then she turned to Adrian. "I love you, Dad," she said. "I love you, kiddo," Adrian said, his voice thick. "More than you know. Since before you were born." Mira pulled back, wiping a tear from her eye. She grabbed her duffel bag. The tag on the handle caught the light. Cadet Mira Cole Nightclaw. She turned and walked down the ramp. She didn't look back. She walked with her head high, her stride, confident, carrying the legacy of two worlds into the stars. Adrian watched her go until the airlock doors cycled shut. He felt a hand slip into his. He looked down. Celine was holding his hand, her fingers interlaced with his. She wasn't hiding it. She wasn't looking around to see who was watching. "She will be fine," Celine said. "I know," Adrian said. "She is stronger than both of us." "So," Celine asked gently, tugging his hand, "what now, War Architect? The war is over. The child is grown. The secrets are out." Adrian looked out at the massive viewport. The stars were vast and cold, indifferent to the tiny lives of the creatures who sailed between them. But for the first time in a long time, the cold didn't bother him. He touched the scar on his chest, the old wound from the shadow beast. It had healed. Now, Adrian turned to Celine, a genuine peaceful smile breaking across his face. "Now, I think I would like to try being happy. It seems like a challenging project." "Happiness is a high-risk endeavor," Celine warned, her golden eyes twinkling. "High probability of failure." "Good thing I am an expert at fixing broken systems," Adrian said. He squeezed her hand. "Let's go home, Celine." They turned and walked away from the gate, back toward the heart of the station. They walked side by side, a human engineer and a vampire queen stepping out of the shadow of the past and into the light of a very ordinary, very extraordinary afternoon. "You are safe now," Adrian whispered to the ghost of his wife in his mind, and to the daughter flying away toward her future. "Not because the universe is kind, but because we finally chose to fight for this family together." And somewhere in the distance, the Eclipse Core hummed a steady rhythmic beat, like a heart that had finally learned how to keep time.